In the previous class, we had discussed on how to reduce the portfolio risk through diversification, and we had actually discussed a portfolio which consists of only two securities. So today we are going to discuss on calculating the portfolio risk and return with a portfolio consisting of more than two securities. Even now we are going to discuss how we can reduce the risk through diversification in case of more than two securities. So when we saw that in diversification we had seen three cases when there was a positive correlation, negative correlation and almost zero or around zero correlation, and we had studied that in all those cases except when there is perfectly positive correlation, that is correlation is 1, diversification was a productive activity. So in case of more than two securities also, if you increase the number of securities and if you include the securities whose correlation is less than +1, diversification will occur. So as the number of securities increase, the risk of the portfolio will decrease as the standard deviation of the portfolio becomes smaller and smaller. Hence, an investor can make the portfolio risk arbitrarily small by including a large number of securities with negative or zero correlation in the portfolio. So that we discussed. But there is a limitation to the diversification. That is, first case, in reality no securities show negative or zero correlation. So there might be a certain amount of correlation that which will range between 0 to +1. So the only thing we can do is include the securities which have a correlation below 1. As a result, diversification results in some reduction in the total portfolio risk but not in complete elimination of risk. We cannot eliminate the risk to 0. That is, we told that the risk reduction will become 0 in case of negatively correlated securities. But in reality, we cannot find negatively correlated securities. So therefore, our portfolio risk cannot be 0, but it will reduce, but it cannot be 0. After reaching a certain level, the portfolio risk will continue to be stagnant at that level. It will not further decrease. That is, most of the reduction in the portfolio standard deviation occurs by the time the portfolio size increases to 25 or 30 securities. Adding securities beyond this size brings about only marginal reduction in portfolio standard deviation. That is the reason number 1. That is, we are actually adding the securities which have almost above 0 correlation. So since above 0 they have the correlation, the risk will be reduced but it cannot be 0. Then the second reason is that we know that the risk of a security comprises of 1 systematic risk and 2 unsystematic risk. It is actually the unsystematic risk that we are diversifying or we are eliminating using the process of diversification. The systematic aspect or element cannot be reduced or eliminated even if we diversify. So the systematic risk will always be prevalent in all the portfolios. So by combining securities into a portfolio, the unsystematic risk specific to different securities is cancelled out. Consequently, the risk of the portfolio as a whole is reduced as the size of the portfolio increases. Ultimately, when the size of the portfolio reaches a certain limit, it will contain only the systematic risk of securities included in the portfolio. This systematic risk, however, cannot be eliminated. So we know that at a particular level, as I told, the risk will fall as we increase the securities until a particular level, and when it reaches the level of systematic risk, the risk will become stable. It will not further reduce. Thus, a fairly large portfolio has only systematic risk and has relatively little unsystematic risk. That is why there is no gain in adding securities to a portfolio beyond a certain portfolio size. And we have a figure which shows the concept. That is, here they have shown number of securities held in the portfolio in the x-axis and risk or the portfolio standard deviation in the y-axis, and you can see when the number of securities are 10, the risk is almost 100, and as we increase the securities to 20, 30, 40, the risk falls. But we can see at a particular level, that is at the systematic risk level, beyond that the risk is not falling. The risk continues at that level. So beyond that level, the systematic risk will be prevalent in the portfolio and the unsystematic risk will be eliminated. So we saw two situations or two reasons why the diversification is not productive when the number of securities increases. The first reason was that we are including the securities who have more than zero correlation. Only if we include the securities which have negative correlation, the risk can be eliminated to zero. But in reality, there is no negative correlated securities. Second reason is that every security has component of systematic risk in it. So this systematic risk cannot be eliminated and it will be prevalent in the security. So that is the case of diversification in case of more than two securities.